Hey, this is John J.R. Robinson, and you are listening to The Break It Down Show. Enjoy the groove.
And now, The Break It Down Show with John and Pete.
John Robinson was born in Creston, Iowa, right at the end of 1954. Began playing piano at age 5, made the solid decision to take up the drums at age 8. By the time he was 10, he had started his own band. He soaked up as much music as he could through high school and then chose to study at Berklee College of Music. Sometime in early 1978, JR was playing a club gig with his band and members of the funk powerhouse Rufus walked into the joint. They couldn't resist joining him on stage, and before long, Rufus had invited JR to join them on a world tour. He said yes and moved to Los Angeles. Before long, he met fellow Berklee alum Quincy Jones and found himself with his pal and Rufus bandmate Bobby Watson recording Michael Jackson's Off the Wall. JR's performances on that iconic album, including the legendary drum intro to Rock With You, have woven into the fabric of popular music, and he has since become the most recorded drummer in history. Here's a very condensed list of the great artists he's played and recorded with since. How about Lionel Richie, Eric Clapton, David Foster, Barbra Streisand, Madonna, George Benson, Natalie Cole, Steve Winwood, Luis Miguel, David Benoit, Wilson Phillips, the Pointer Sisters, David Lee Roth, Sergio Mendes, Lisa Stansfield, and Daft Punk, among many, many others. JR's played with Barbra Streisand since 1993 and with Quincy Jones since 1979, including the drums on We Are the World. He's played on dozens of film soundtracks, and for the past several years has been the drummer in the orchestra at the Oscars. And if it all weren't enough, he's a loving family man, a great guy. People always have nice things to say about JR, and he's the host of EnterTalk Radio's Vinyl Night. And man, I am beside myself to have you on my podcast, JR Robinson. Thanks, man.
John, it's my pleasure, and it's an honor to be on the Break It Down Show, and it's nice to get back on the other side of the microphone for a change.
Man, I love Vinyl Night. It's amazing to have your insight and the access you have to artists and producers and engineers is just ridiculous.
I've been truly blessed, being at kind of the right place at the right time in the ascension of the music industry, from the late 70s when I first joined Rufus into the great 80s. And, I've been able to kind of tap into some of that. So it's good, and it's also a great learning experience.
Can we rewind all the way back to Creston, Iowa? Because I know that you play in places where you could fit the entire population of Creston, Iowa, like 5 or 6 times.
Yes, but it's a beautiful town, and I was back there a couple of years ago. It's a town of around 8,000 people. It was a railroad town, and it used to be the principal stop between Chicago and Denver for Amtrak and freight and that sort of thing, Burlington route. So I always just remembered it being a train town, and it's near Des Moines and north of Kansas City and kind of a little bit east of Omaha, so it's right there in that southwest Iowa quarter. But it was very musical, that town. Even before I started shedding any sort of hint of being a pro, as a little boy, there was all sorts of bands. There were always bands playing. And when I got into the school system, even though I was already playing piano and drums and when I started taking lessons, there was a great education of music in Iowa. And I'm very, very proud to be from there.
Well, it is still a train town, and right now it's still a stop on Amtrak in the California Zephyr line, which runs from Chicago all the way out here to the Bay Area. So I did notice that about it. Yeah. So it'll get you here. And for the environment there to produce a guy who could go on to continue to study music in college, that's a great incubator. And sometimes those small towns like Creston, Iowa, turn out some amazing things. You still have family there? You're still connected to Creston?
I have cousins in Marshalltown, Iowa, and State Center, Iowa, and so I'm still connected to the state, but I don't get back as much.
I've only spent a grand total of 4 days in Iowa, and while I was out there, there was an event called Ragbri, which is a bike ride.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I just had the amazing timing to be there during Ragbri. I was in Waterloo, and everybody that I fell in love with Waterloo. I had a great time. Blues Traveler was there while I was there. And everybody I talked
yeah.
to, I said, man, I love this place. This is great. What a great town. Everybody said, you came here on the perfect day. So
yeah, Ragbri, it says the bicycle. Isn't that both coast? We say the coast in Iowa.
The coast.
You know, because on the eastern side we have the Mississippi, and the west the Missouri. So, yeah, that's some serious bike riders.
Yeah, it stands for Registers Annual. It's the Des Moines Register that throws it. Registers Annual Great Bike Ride Across Iowa, and it's a rolling party that goes from one end of the state, like you said, coast to coast. And I think they take about 7 or 8 days to do it. But every day that they stop in some town that just absorbs and promotes the party. And it's great. But, I want to talk about when you were in that club and ended up meeting your future bandmates in Rufus. Where was that?
Well, I was out of Berkeley in Boston. I got out of Berkeley in 75. So I was floating with multiple bands between 75 and 78. And settled on this one band called Shelter, and it was like an 8-piece show band. I had hired a really, really great singer named Janet Tyler to sing lead, and we ended up getting a tour of Ohio. So, it was quite a ways away from Massachusetts, and so we all got in the cars and drove. So one of the stops, and actually it was the first stop, was in Cleveland, northeast Cleveland, and it was a town called Mentor. Ironically, interesting name. And we were held up there for 2 weeks. And on the second week, Rufus and Chaka Khan, all of them came into the club just to chill before their gig. And, they asked the leader of the band, a couple of the rhythms, I think it was Bobby and Hawk, can we sit in with your drummer? And I looked at the guy, Jimmy, and I just gave him the big yes sign. And we took over the club.
Wow.
We started playing, and then Chaka came up a little bit later, and that was the New Level Rufus, and that was when was that?
Somewhere in early 78.
February or March of 78, something like that.
That's still a cold time to be in Cleveland, but when you get in the car and you go tour Ohio, Cleveland's a rockin' town. They put the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame there for a reason. And, of course, Dayton,
right.
Dayton's the capital of funk. So
absolutely, and that was one of the cities. It was really strange because my band was touring the same cities as Rufus, but, we were playing just clubs, and these guys were headlining, giant arenas. And so it was tagging around kind of the same thing, and it was obviously meant to be.
Yeah, clearly. Well, I listened to your episode of Vinyl Night where you featured Bobby Watson.
Yeah.
Wow. What a great guy to sort of have launched the next step in your career.
Absolutely. And a lot of people maybe not familiar with Bobby Watson. He's an L.A. guy, great bass player. Ended up with, he was in a band called High Voltage on CBS, and then that morphed. Him and Tony got the gig with Billy Preston. And this is like Nothing from Nothing days, really kind of right post-Beatles. And then Andre Fisher, the original drummer in Rufus, gave Bobby and Tony a call and asked them to join Rufus around 74 because the original band didn't want to go on the road from Chicago. So it was very interesting the way everything worked out. And then getting into the Michael Jackson days real quick is it was Bobby and Hawk Walensky were both on that Michael Jackson session. Because Hawk was playing Rhodes.
Wow.
Yeah, it was very, very interesting how Quincy cast that. I mean, I did the whole record with plug me into different rhythm sections. It was really cool.
Maybe this isn't right to say because who knows what record's going to be huge, but it's Quincy Jones and it's Michael Jackson. Was that the first session where you looked around and went, holy smoke, this is serious?
Absolutely. That was my first major record. I mean, I had recorded other things and stuff out of Boston and stuff for this, for Berkeley, but I'd never, it wasn't a major record. And, the first call I got is, now remember, backing up 12 months, Quincy was producing Rufus and Chaka, and our record was Master Jam. So I was already in with him, and he liked guys from Berkeley, so it kind of worked out really well. But when I got asked to continue and just keep going with Michael Jackson, I said, of course, yes. But it was like a Thursday, if I'm not mistaken. And I was asked to come in and overdub on a couple of tunes. And, I wasn't even active with a cartage company in those days. So my roadie, Bear, Robert Lemons, had an old, I think it was a 62 Ford telephone truck. And we threw all my shit in there. And that was the beginning of Bear Cartage, which eventually then turned into Starstruck.
Wow.
Which eventually turned into the Third Encore with the Eagles. And so that was the first session we did outside of Rufus. And he brought my drums in and set them up, and I was by myself. And the first song that was put up was Girlfriend by Paul McCartney. And, I heard it, and I didn't want to listen to it if it was pre-recorded by someone else. I didn't want to hear it. And, I listened to it. I made a chart and heard the clicks and recorded it. And then they gave me another one, and It's the Falling in Love, which was written, ironically, by my boss now, David Foster, and Carol Bear Sager. And I recorded that. And then I'm sitting there, and after listening, went back on the drums, and they pushed the talk back down, and they go, "What are you doing Monday?" And I go, "Nothing." He goes, "Well, you want to come back and record the rest of the album?" And I go, "Yes." So that's then answering your question is when, we cut Don't Stop Till You Get Enough. And I knew out of the gates that was the number one record.
That had to be one of those sessions where, that song is so thick, it's undeniable. That song is a force. And so just to be a part of that session, if that's when it clicked in for you that it just got serious, that's perfect. That really sums up that story so perfectly. What about Rock With You? I'm sure you've been asked a zillion times about the intro to Rock With You.
Yes.
What made you think of that? Because it's so unique now. Were you going for something different, or was that just something that sort of fell on your drum set?
Well, a little bit of both. Of course, that was written by the great late Rod Temperton.
Yeah.
And Rod had a demo, and Rod is really specific with his bass parts. So he would, if it was Louis Johnson or Bobby Watson playing bass, or even Greg Fillinganes playing a left-handed bass part, he would be extremely precise with the guitar, bass, and, the drums were fairly, I guess, simplistic in a sense from his demo. And I just used inspiration from that, but that didn't come for several takes. And, I tell the story a lot. It was me and Bobby Watson and Hawk Walensky, and I believe it was Marlo Henderson or David Williams playing guitar. We were maybe 3 takes in, and we were at Westlake B in Hollywood, and I see Quincy and Rod come out, and they basically stand right around my shoulders, and they're breathing on me, and I look, Rod's on my left smoking a red Marlboro, and Quincy's on my right, and Quincy goes, "JR, if you could come up with an intro that the whole world would forever identify with this song, what would it be?" And I'm thinking to myself, damn. That's like,
no pressure.
Okay, and I've already, I always maybe did a setup fill with songs. That's something I learned in the old days. And in today's times, there's no lead-in time. It doesn't give you enough time really to do that as a drummer. But in those days, there was lead-in time. So it was the next take. These, the cats just looked at me and go, "Oh, shit." And so they went back into the control room, Quincy and Rod, and then I heard the 4 clicks, and boom, that was it.
Wow.
And it was some sort of a magic. But what I did was I never liked straight 16th notes and triplets within one phrase. I just thought that it was kind of blasphemy, and so I exactly did that. I took syncopation, straight 16ths, and triplets, and put it together for that fill, and added a flam in there.
Yeah, the flam is key. And it's funny that you mentioned that, the lead in on the drums and how there's no time for that. Because nowadays, you're right, DJs and the way they spin, they blend everything, but everybody's got time for that intro. And no matter where you are, you're dancing to the DJ. When that song comes on, nobody just drops it in the second bar when when all the other instruments are coming in, you leave time for that intro. And man, that's great. And that really kind of cemented you then.
It did. I mean, after that, I got a phone call from Diana Ross, and it was like, I was so happy to get that phone call. And she goes, I want the drummer who played on Rock With You. And I go, okay. So I went in, a couple of weeks later and cut Missing You, which was another #1 record. Yeah. And it just, at that point, it started, the chain reaction was good. And we had a great run there, with songwriters and record companies and budgets. And it was great. It was great.
Did you work with Rod Temperton again?
I worked with Rod many times after that for James Ingram, and I did Yamo Be There with Michael McDonald, and then we did Quincy Jones, The Dude. After Thriller, Rod got quite large and very selective. So it was all good. We always had a great relationship. But remember, Rod was in the 1981 Quincy Jones band as keyboard 2. And that band was, if people go to YouTube and Google the Quincy Jones band from 1981, and you'll see a whole Japanese thing we did, and it was just smoking. It was absolutely smoking. So Rod was doing his thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of great stuff on YouTube. I'm glad that footage was captured of all of that stuff, because you can see the Quincy Jones band or the Quincy Jones orchestra through the years, all the way up to his 75th birthday just a few years ago. And it's like you can see the evolution of that big band. Right.
And we actually then, about 2 years ago, we went to Japan and Korea also and did some more dates. And then after that 75th, we did a benefit for Claude Knobs over at Montreux again. So because they were very, 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 very close. So yeah, I mean, if I had my way, I'd have that band out now. But to keep a big band on the road is extremely costly.
Oh man, you can see it on the stage too. I mean, there's so much to that setup, and there's a lot of people to keep fed.
Oh yeah, fed and flown.
Yeah, fed and flown, right? Yeah.
It's not like 1974 when, oh yeah, we're all going to bunk up at the Holiday Inn. I don't think I'm going to bunk up with my bass player anymore.
Well, that brings to mind two stories that I'll tell you. The one time I was at the Great American Music Hall in San Francisco, and I was watching Dick Bright, SRO. And Dick Bright is a band leader in San Francisco who's kind of a fixture up here in the Bay Area. And the band was great, and I found myself in the crowd, and I was dancing with this lady who just was right next to me and obviously having the greatest time. So, I couldn't help but catch on the contagious good time. And I was dancing with her, and a couple songs into it, we just kept dancing. And Dick Bright at one point acknowledged that, hey, we have a very special guest in the audience. It's Patty Austin. And I looked over and I went, I've been dancing with Patty Austin all night. So that was great.
You probably had no fun, did you?
Yeah, really. Man, she was just a big ball of energy. And all by herself. I don't know why she was all by herself.
I don't know. Maybe she was sussing you out, dude.
I don't know. I should be so lucky. But the other thing that it brings to mind is one of the other drummers we've had on the show is Rich Aguan, who's with the Whispers now, but he did that great bit when Hammer was the biggest thing. He did that great big Hammer tour. And he was older than many of the other folks on the tour. That tour had a lot of young dancers and stuff. And he and Billy Shoes Johnson were the two drummers on the tour. And they were the veterans. So they made sure that they all had their own rooms and that they had stuff written into their contract that sounds like, you get to take for granted now at this point in your career. But, a lot of the other younger guys on the tour, because that was an enormous group of people to take around too, they were like, how did you guys get your own room?
Right, exactly.
So you're not bunking with the bass player anymore.
No, or the lead singer. So, which, is not acceptable. But it's like, I've been very, very blessed, and with these young kids coming up today, and they're probably in a van and going to these gigs, you got to pay your dues.
Pay your dues. That's right.
And you can't expect not to. And I think I've met and worked with some younger musicians, not drummers, like, other people that think that they could just jump right to the A level right out of the gates, and it doesn't work that way. It just doesn't. I mean, even for a songwriter, Hawk Walensky had some really great words of wisdom. He said, listen, man, I've written thousands of songs, and maybe 2 will stick, but the key is to write every single day something. Write every day. And, for drummers, I think that applies also. You try to write something every day, if you can't play another instrument, I would suggest you learn, whether it be piano or guitar, and just try to formulate your ideas, document them, put them in some sort of organizational folder. So, 8 months from now, you go, wait a second, man, I had this idea. Oh, there it is. Hey, and that might work with today's idea. Wow, what a concept, So, songwriting is very difficult, but I kind of emphasize that as far as furthering your drumming or your musical career.
You're capturing your ideas, you're growing your ideas, nurturing them, and you still actually write. You put pen to paper?
I will do that. I was very blessed to have my college career was at Berkeley, but, before that, backing up to, when I was a kid and singing in church with my father, learning how to read, and then taking that to music camps. And, my first music camp, I was a freshman. Actually, in Iowa, it was 3 years of junior high and 3 years of high school. So as a freshman, you're still in junior high school. And I went to Northwest Missouri State University for that first camp. And then the next year, I went to Iowa State University for basketball camp and made the all-star team because I was juggling with that concept. And, was trying to split your life in half in 2 A levels is very difficult to do.
Wow.
And then the next 2 years, I went to Illinois State University for music, and that's when I met Ed Sof and John LaPorta, Marion McPartland and Gary Burton, and those people, which helped guide my direction to get out of Iowa and go to Boston.
Wow. That's quite a cast.
Yeah.
So
good little players, as we say.
So when you went on that first tour with Rufus, what was that like? I mean, here's a funk powerhouse band, and that's your emerging tour. Was there any kind of big touring band kind of shell shock that you experienced, or was it just the next logical step and you were playing up and you were ready for it 100%?
I think the latter is true, but I caught them at the end of their tour. So, generally the majority of people that were in that organization were fairly burnt out, and to be honest. And, I think when I came in, I probably lit a fire under everybody's ass, as a 23-year-old.
You came in right when everybody was ready to get off the road, and you went, nope, let's keep going.
It could have been, yeah. Just a little bit more, come on. And then right when we got off the road, there was this kind of a lull, and I hadn't met anybody else, so I wasn't doing sessions, and all I did was, until we had a Rufus solo deal on ABC Dunhill, and we were still with Steppenwolf and the Crusaders and Steely Dan. We were lumped into this group. So we did a record without Chaka, which was called Numbers. It was really quite a great record. I helped get Freddie Hubbard on the record, and it was kind of a breaking point for me to learn recording techniques. I mean, I was very young, and I was coming off, playing hard on the road, and I didn't really have that mindset yet to manipulate a microphone and understand what a microphone does and is, and how they all group together, and how how the engineer and you are friends and things like that I learned, I learned hard.
Wow.
And then, it was very, very interesting. And I teach that when I go out and do seminars, to these young guys about, you need to know about microphones and sound pressure and mic positioning and velocity, and not to play, you don't play balls out. You just don't do it. There's a certain level of the drums. It can only go so loud.
Well, that's part of the dues paying process, though, that you're talking about. And one of those things that you got to get the miles in, unless somebody is kind enough to show you those things. You learn them, like you said, you learn the hard way. But I want to go back because you said this grouping that included Rufus, Steppenwolf, who else was on there?
The Crusaders and Steely Dan.
The Crusaders and Steely Dan, and that was that a tour, or was that who was on ABC Dunhill?
No. There was just the artists signed to ABC Dunhill.
Okay.
And that was right. Then all those artists got bought and sent over to MCA in those days.
Oh wow!
Which we used to call it Music Cemetery of America.
That's where artists went to die, huh?
It was a very interesting time, and then thank God we actually did a great record on MCA with Shaka, but then we went over to Warner Brothers, which was just fantastic.
Which was better, yeah. Well, ABC Dunhill, we had a guy named Jeff Traeger on the show about a year ago, and he was an executive at Blue Thumb, but he, I think, worked with ABC Dunhill on something. He was trying to get Tower of Power signed. But he described ABC Dunhill famously as they had their shot at Santana and they said, "Nah, I don't see it." They saw Santana and didn't get it.
Yeah, that was a major faux pas.
Yeah,
obviously.
no kidding. And they wanted to be on CBS anyway. But what do you think about nowadays, though? Now that there are no gatekeepers in the music industry, and now that you don't have to be signed to a major label to get out on the road. And do you think that it changes at all the requirements of discipline for a band?
Yes. I mean, it used to be you do everything to make the record, and the record would be your income and sales. And now it's the opposite of that. Now you make the record to tour.
Right. And you make your money on the road.
What little there is, yes, that is correct. It's changed, and in the 70s and 80s and the 90s, partially, it was record recording based, and analog, and then the conversion to digital. I think that a young band today, and they should want to go out and tour, but when you can download a record for $8. But you're only hearing it in a compressed, limited tunnel version audio way. And, I would venture to say if you took a poll, 60% of Americans wouldn't know the difference between an MP3 and something higher end.
Something warmer. Yeah, it's a shame. My son, I have a son who's 19, and he has taken up a vinyl collection all by himself. I didn't nothing I spurred on. My dad helped, so he got a record player from Grandpa, and he started to collect vinyl. And man, he's going right for the good stuff. And I'm really trying to let him do it on his own, but he is reaching for all the good stuff. And you're right; it's something that a lot of people just miss out on. And sometimes I'll catch him listening to Steely Dan in the morning or something. I'll go, "Hey, how's it going?" And he'll just say, "Man, this Bluetooth player for his MP3 that he's got his phone on that he takes into the bathroom to take a shower to." But as soon as he's done doing that, he'll go back into his bedroom where it's vinyl warmth. And
excellent.
Yeah, it's great to see that ears still matter out there.
Yeah, I think that, and like I said, I kind of painted a darker picture a couple of minutes ago, but on the same note, I think that the kids are getting this vinyl thing again with just a stereo amp. And I mean, kind of like how I grew up, and it was great. And there's something magical about putting a vinyl record on and then opening up the album sleeve and reading credits and looking at things and looking at the picture, and you kind of imagine what it was like. And it's just this beautiful, glorious process that hopefully is coming back.
Yeah, let's hope. I mean, the anticipation of it all, and then the unwrapping, and then you get you pull the sleeve out and you start to read all the things about who engineered the record. You download an MP3 and all of that stuff is lost. Nobody knows who the engineers are anymore. And, not that everybody thought that was important, but I'm with you, man. It's a part of the experience that was really special and really magical. And I think there's a generation that missed it. And I'm glad to see that there are younger people saying, hey, man, this is cool, and getting into it. Whose idea was Vinyl Night?
That was mine.
All right. Wow.
Yeah, mine. And actually, I've taken a little bit of a sabbatical from the show because I just got back from Asia. I was touring with through David Foster with Brian McKnight and Shaka.
Oh wow!
So I just got back, so I'm in decompression mode. But I'm going to start firing the show back up pretty soon here.
Well, I'm really elated that I caught you when I did. Now that you're freshly back, and
yes, thank you.
I was going to ask who you were out there with. How many cities did you visit?
We did 4. We started out in. We did a gig in Washington, D.C. a couple of weeks ago for the Horatio Alger Awards.
Oh.
And then from there we moved to Singapore and then did 3 cities in Southeast Asia. And then there's going to be, there's rumor of another tour in November back there and maybe up into China. But, I've got some other things in the fire separately, which I'm going to keep under my under my radar.
Okay. Well, for our listeners, make sure you guys go to Enter Talk Radio. That's ENTER talkradio.com. That's where you'll find Vinyl Night and, of course, iTunes and Stitcher and everywhere else you find good podcasts. You can find Vinyl Night there. And when you scroll through there, you see a lot of just people who have created a lot of the history of music that I grew up on, certainly, that you were busy making and I was busy listening to and growing up on. And, man, just fascinating stuff on the show. If I have one thing, though, that I noticed, I listened very recently to your episode with Ndugu, and I didn't know that...
Ndugu, Chancellor.
I didn't know that he played... on those Michael Jackson records that you guys mentioned. I think you talked about PYT. And,
yeah, he played on PYT and he played on Thriller, I think.
Okay.
On that single, yeah, he, Ndugu is such a great cat, and I've been friends for 30 years.
Wow.
But there's people ask me about that, and I was called and booked for 2 weeks on that record, and at the exact same time, or slightly prior to that, I was negotiating with Glen Frey from the Eagles, and I made the decision to go on the road with Glen Frey, and so I was Glen's first drummer when the Eagles broke up. And that was kind of the direction I wanted to go. And it kind of led me through some other artists eventually, which would have been Bob Seger, Stevie Nicks. I became musical director for John Fogerty in 1985-86, which was a really dark period because we couldn't play any Creedence tunes. Because
wow.
John was getting sued. He was getting sued by Saul Zaentz, and in that suit said he couldn't play any Creedence tunes. Well, John Fogerty is Creedence. So
yeah, really.
We were in a catch-22. So we went out and toured on Center Field and Eye of the Zombie, which was very dark gold record. People want to check that out. It's like, whoa, okay. And then after that, I moved into the Steve Winwood thing, and so there was a whole bunch. And then David Lee Roth was before that. But all these were Warner Brothers connections, and being on Warner Brothers with Rufus, it was was a good kind of a family thing for me to do. And then once
Yeah, that ended up being a gold mine for you.
It was a good direction. Musically, it was also, I think, the most important thing was how I fit in with those songwriters and artists. And then we came back in and did We Are the World, in '85, and then went right into Bad with Michael again. So
wow,
it was all good.
I just also recently watched, and I encourage everybody else to go watch the documentary that Spike Lee made on Bad. That was really good.
Oh, yes, I'm Bad, yeah.
Yeah, that was really, really good. Featured Bruce Sweeting a lot. So, yeah, everybody go watch that because that's a terrific documentary. And it's really a lot about how you follow up the biggest record in the world with something that can be different and still compete with what was the biggest record in the world. And then, had Thriller not been around, Bad would have been the biggest record in the world.
Bad was huge. It would have definitely, set the bar high, but, Thriller was the timing of Thriller was phenomenal. And, I give that to Quincy and Rod, for that. I think that was fantastic.
Yeah. What about We Are the World? How was that? I mean, just the sheer volume of artists that came in on that session. Did that have anything to do with your process, or did you guys record the music first and then usher in all the singers?
Yes, we actually did it that way. That is correct. The rhythm section, which was Greg Fillinganes and Louis Johnson on bass.
Well, there's an okay rhythm section.
Oh my God! We cut probably 80% of Quincy's momentum in the '80s, and we went to Lionshare A, which was owned by Kenny Rogers, which ironically was ABC Dunhill. That was where ABC. It was when I first moved to Los Angeles. That was where ABC Dunhill was, and I found myself working there all the time for Kenny, and Kenny kind of co-sponsored the recording session. So we did that. God, there was so much media. Like 50 cameras just firing, and I had to kick them out because, Inside Story was, we're there and we're working out the arrangement and time's ticking, and
you had work to do.
All of a sudden, we have the arrangement, and then Quincy kind of looks at me, he goes, JR, let's go. And so that means he wants me to carry a big stick, and I did, and I went out there and basically kicked every media person out of the studio in a kind of an ugly manner. And I said, give us 20 minutes, you guys come back in. So then we cut it, and then let everybody back in, and had the track, and went home. And so then they had organized the singers within that next week, and then they went over to A&M and cut it that way.
I see.
It was better. It was more controllable.
Yeah, especially for that many people. There was a neat story on Live from Daryl's House with Kenny Loggins, and he said that at one point he and Paul Simon kind of made eye contact in the midst of all the melee, and he and Paul Simon made eye contact, and Paul Simon said, if somebody dropped a bomb on this joint right now, John Denver would be back on top.
Wow. Yeah. I think I'd heard that. That's funny.
Yeah. So the other thing that I wanted to ask you about with regard to Vinyl Night is
yes.
Where do you move forward? Are you planning on because you've got such a gold mine of, you just named a bunch of artists. I thought I did a pretty good intro, and I had this long list of folks. And you just named 15 more people that I didn't even catch in my intro. Glen Frey wasn't in there. John Fogerty wasn't in there. And what segment of your career do you mind next for Vinyl Night?
There's a part of me that's maybe looking into a Sirius XM direction.
Okay.
We'll see how that progresses. The Vinyl Night thing is great because it's basically, it's like you and I are having this chat, and it's like, it's like we're in the same room and everything's cool. We're buddies and having a beer, and that's kind of the way it should be with communication. And so, I've got a huge list of people I haven't tapped into yet, and that'll be great. I will do that. as far as other directions I'm doing, I'm in a movie that's coming out May 17th, and it's very bizarre. And I'm actually acting as a drummer. I'm playing drums, and it's called "If You're Not in the Obit, Eat Breakfast," and it's with Carl Reiner, and it's basically Norman Lear and Mel Brooks, Kirk Douglas, Dick Van Dyke, Stan Lee, all these legends, produced by George Shapiro and directed by the great Danny Gold. And it's about these older people who are just so inspirational, and it's funny at the same time. And so that comes out, and we're looking at maybe possibly getting into scoring film. I just produced, it came out about a month and a half ago, an interactive rock opera, which is really bizarre, called Null Paradox. And it's with two female singers, and we did it mostly down at Dark Horse in Nashville. And then I did a lot of the stuff here at the home studio. But that's out now for people to check out. It's very brazen. It's kind of Janis Joplin meets Nine Inch Nails, so Null Paradox.
And it's an interactive rock opera.
Well, yeah, and that means that live you can change scene structure or the ending.
Okay.
But the record,
choose your own adventure.
You could. On the record, it is what it is.
Okay.
But it's rocking, so everybody check that out.
Well, I just want to say that you've made a life out of traveling in some pretty esteemed circles, man. You kind of brushed by, I'm in this movie with Carl Reiner and Norman Lear, and, they're both, I'd love to meet either one of them. There was the documentary that's out on Norman Lear is terrific right now. It's on Netflix.
Yeah.
And so is it that you just happen to be in the movie, or when they say, well, who do we get that's Norman Lear quality who does each thing? And then they just went down the list and went, we need a drummer. Well, get JR.
Well, no. Actually, it came from through Danny Gold, who's friends with a dear friend of mine, Terry Woolman,
okay,
who's a great guitar player, artist. And I've done, 5 records with Terry since the 80s. And Terry was MD, and Terry goes, let's get me and let's get Nathan East and, some other cats. And we did 2 different segments. So it was through Terry that came to pass.
That's terrific. Hey, I'll be with Nathan about this time tomorrow. So I have a little heads up to ask him about that.
All right, definitely ask him, and he and I call each other our wives. So you tell my wife I missed.
I will. I'm sure I'll get a kick out of that. Hey, so
yeah.
One last thing I want to ask you about was the Oscars. You always post pictures on your Facebook about when they're doing the Oscars, and you are the live drummer in the orchestra at the Oscars. How long have you been doing that?
Well, we didn't do it this last year because I've done it probably over the last 10 years, maybe 5 or 6 times. But,
okay.
Depending on the producer of the show, I'm not always that drummer, but I think this year was Ralph Humphreys.
Oh, okay.
But depending on the producer of the show and the direction of the musical director, when Bill Ross, who was just a very, he's the guy that works with John Williams and Barbra Streisand, when Bill Ross does it, I do it. And that's been just some, it's a hard chair. It's a very difficult chair because you're reading a gigantic book of every possible style.
Every possible style.
You're also dealing with an artist who would be singing, if we're recording at Capitol in Hollywood, and the artist is at the Dolby down the street, you're dealing with between a 9 and a 16 millisecond delay. So it's pretty amazing technology to get it that low.
Wow. That is pretty amazing technology. Again, here's another thing that you get to experience as a drummer, as an artist, who you only get there because you've done the miles and you've done your time and you've paid years and years of the utmost of dues anybody could possibly be paying. And now here you are experiencing playing in the pit at the Oscars. And who gets to experience these things and, the subtle dynamics of what it means to fill that chair. And like you said, that is one heck of a chair, man, because...
let me tell you a real quick story before we wind up.
Please.
I'm sure you got a couple more to fit in, but one of the highlights of my Oscar career was when I got to play with Dame Shirley Bassey, and we got to do Goldfinger.
Wow.
And I was like, because I'm such a James Bond nut, especially Sean Connery James Bond, and just, was like just so much into it, and always loved her version. I mean, it is her version, but to play that with her live, with that 85-piece orchestra was, man, it was one of the greatest experiences of my life.
Yeah, that's goosebump worthy.
Yeah, and that's on YouTube. You can find that.
I'm just going to take a sidebar with our audience and say, the guy who recorded Thriller, Off the Wall with Quincy Jones for Michael Jackson just told the story about the thing that moved him. So everybody latch on to that. Go check it out on YouTube. Also want to shout out all your social media stuff. You are at John J.R. Robinson on Twitter, at John J.R. Robinson. You are also johnjrrobinson.com. You can go there, and I'm sure you're keeping everybody informed through that website. And then again, go to at Intertalk Radio to check out Vinyl Night. Just to close up, I just want to say, man, you've given me and a generation of listeners so much great music. And as a drummer in the generation of drummers that you gave so much to, I just want to say thanks, man.
Well, John, thank you very much also. And, it's shows like the Break It Down show that are informative, to people. And sometimes if you can get one person to just be enlightened, that triggers an array of multiple people becoming enlightened. And it's been my pleasure to be on your show. And please don't be a stranger. And everybody, I love you guys. And thank you for all your support through the years.
John J.R. Robinson, everybody. Thank you.
All right, buddy. All the best.